Snow had a way of erasing edges that night, of softening even the hardest outlines until the world looked forgiven. The train station crouched beneath the storm like an old animal, lanterns flickering amber against the white, steam breathing from iron lungs. Somewhere far down the track, a whistle had already faded, leaving behind only quiet and the sense of having been left. Eliza May Thorne stood beneath the eaves with her hands tucked uselessly into sleeves gone thin from too many winters. Her breath came out uneven, a small, frightened thing, and her boots, once good leather, had surrendered hours ago to slush and cold. She did not cry. Crying wasted heat. She had learned that on the road. Instead, she counted the boards beneath her feet, traced the cracks with her eyes, and told herself that if she stayed awake, the night could not take her. No one waited with her. That was the sharpest truth of all. She had arrived on the afternoon train with a single case and a letter folded too many times, only to discover that the town she'd been promised had already decided against her. A boy sent by the boarding-house owner had delivered the message without meeting her eyes. "Full up," he'd said. Regretful, but firm. Others had turned her away more quietly, doors closing with apologies that felt rehearsed. By evening, the cold had grown bold, and Eliza had returned to the station because it was the only place that did not ask questions. The storm thickened. Snow pressed against the glass like a crowd with nowhere else to go. She thought of warmer rooms, of hospital corridors that smelled of lye and soap, of nights spent bent over beds where life trembled between her hands. Nursing had taught her to be steady when others broke, to move gently through pain without making it about herself. It had not taught her how to survive rumor. The story the town had chosen was easier than the truth. A man dead, a woman near him, whispers that clung like burrs. No one had asked her how long she'd sat beside that bed, or how quietly he'd gone. Eliza shifted her weight, her legs trembling now despite her resolve. The station master, Silas Boone, watched her from behind the ticket window. He was a good man, worn down by years of other people's departures. Twice he had stepped toward her, then stopped, glancing at the clock as though rules might notice. When he finally looked away, she understood. Kindness, like warmth, had limits. The sound of the arriving train cut through the night, a long, aching call. Eliza straightened on instinct, smoothing her coat, though there was no one to see her. Steam rolled across the platform as the engine slowed, and figures began to descend. Boots hitting wood, voices low, faces hidden beneath scarves and hats. That was when she saw him. Caleb Whitlock did not hurry. He stepped down from the train with the patience of a man accustomed to being waited on, yet nothing about him asked for attention. His coat was dark and heavy, snow catching in the fur collar. He carried no valise himself. A porter set it down at his feet and tipped his hat. Caleb nodded once, already scanning the platform, his eyes thoughtful, distant, as though he were measuring more than space. People noticed him. They always did. Some men gathered wealth like noise, announcing it with every movement. Caleb wore his quietly, the way a mountain carries snow, inevitable, indifferent. A cattle baron, they said. Owned half the valley, maybe more. Lived alone on a rise west of town, where the wind never quite rested. His gaze moved past the familiar faces and found Eliza. It was not desire that stilled him, nor pity. It was recognition, the simple, unsettling awareness of someone out of place. She stood too still, too careful, as if the world might bruise if she leaned against it. Her hair had come loose beneath her hat, dark strands clinging to her cheek. Her lips were pale, but her eyes, those were steady, watchful, unbroken. Caleb took a step, then stopped. He had learned, over years of quiet living, to distrust the impulse to interfere. Trouble followed interference. And yet, as another gust of wind cut across the platform, he saw her sway. He crossed the distance without speaking. Eliza flinched when a shadow fell across her. She looked up, already prepared for refusal, and found instead a coat being lifted from broad shoulders. The man did not meet her eyes as he held it out, as though the offering itself required no witness. "You'll freeze," he said simply. The words were plain. It was the manner that undid her. No question, no judgment, just fact. For a moment, pride rose sharp and familiar. She had survived worse than cold. She could endure this too. Then her fingers betrayed her, numb and slow, and she felt the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. She nodded once. The coat was warm, astonishingly so. It carried the clean scent of leather and winter air, and when she slipped her arms into it, her breath shuddered despite her will. Caleb stepped back immediately, giving her space as though she might need it to breathe. From the corner of the station, Mrs. Harlan Crow watched. Her mouth pressed into a line thin as wire. Tomorrow the town would talk. Silas Boone cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitlock," he said carefully, "storm's only gettin' worse." Caleb inclined his head. "I'll take her." It was not phrased as a question. Still, he looked to Eliza, waiting. She hesitated only a second. "Thank you," she said. Her voice surprised her. Steady, low. She followed him into the night. The wagon stood rimmed with snow, the horses shifting patiently, steam rising from their flanks. Caleb helped her up without touching her, then took the reins. They rode out of the station yard as the storm closed behind them, the town's lights dissolving into blur. The road west wound through open land, the snow swallowing sound until only the creak of leather and the soft crunch of hooves remained. Eliza drew the coat tighter, feeling warmth seep slowly back into places she'd forgotten existed. She wanted to speak, to explain, to justify, but something in his silence felt like permission not to. Caleb kept his eyes forward. He was aware of her beside him in the way one becomes aware of weather, subtle, constant. He noticed the way she held herself, careful not to take up space. He noticed her hands, scarred faintly at the knuckles, the marks of work done without complaint. The ranch emerged from the white like a held breath, a broad house with lamps glowing in its windows, solid and unadorned. Caleb reined the horses and helped her down, his movements economical, respectful. Inside, warmth wrapped around them. The house smelled of wood smoke and coffee gone cold. Caleb took her wet boots without comment, set them near the hearth, and gestured toward a chair. He fetched a blanket, draped it around her shoulders, then stepped back again, as if crossing some invisible line would be a trespass. "There's a room," he said. "You can stay as long as you need." Eliza sank into the chair, the world tilting slightly as heat returned too fast. Her eyes stung, and she blinked hard, unwilling to let gratitude spill into something messier. "I won't be trouble," she said. Caleb shook his head once. "You won't be alone." It was the last thing she heard before sleep claimed her, sudden and deep. Outside, the storm raged on, relentless as rumor. Inside, the fire burned steady, and in the quiet space between two guarded souls, something fragile and unspoken began to take shape, like warmth finding its way back into a frozen hand. Morning arrived gently, as though it feared waking her. Pale winter light crept across the floor and climbed the walls, catching on dust motes that drifted like slow thoughts. Eliza woke with a start, her body braced for cold, for refusal, but none came. The room held warmth without asking anything in return. A quilt lay neatly tucked around her, heavy and clean, and the fire in the hearth had been banked to embers that still breathed. For a long moment, she simply lay there, listening. The house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not empty. Somewhere below, wood shifted softly, the sound of a place that knew how to stand alone. She dressed carefully and stepped into the main room. A plate waited on the table, bread, eggs, a mug wrapped in cloth to keep the heat. Caleb was nowhere in sight. No explanation accompanied the meal, no note, no expectation. The absence felt considerate rather than cold, and it unsettled her more than questions ever had. Days passed that way. Eliza helped where she could, moving through the house like a guest determined not to outstay her welcome. She cleaned, cooked, mended. Caleb never corrected her, never praised her. When they shared a room, they spoke of weather, of horses, of nothing that could bruise. Yet in the quiet between words, something eased. She noticed how he always rose first to tend the fire, how he listened without interrupting, how he left space even when the silence grew long. The town did not forget her absence. When she ventured in for supplies, eyes followed. Mrs. Crow's voice carried easily in the general store, sweetened with concern sharp enough to cut. Eliza felt the weight of it press against her back, but she did not turn. Shame had ruled her long enough. Winter tightened its grip. Illness crept through the valley, moving house to house with quiet insistence. A child took fever first, then another. Eliza heard of it from a passing hand, her pulse quickening with an old, familiar urgency. She waited for Caleb to object. He did not. He drove her into town without a word, loaded the wagon with linens and what medicine she named. He stood aside as she worked, a steady presence at the edge of rooms thick with fear. When mothers hesitated, when whispers rose, she met them with calm hands and clear eyes. She did not defend herself. She healed. One night, after hours spent bent over a small body finally breathing easy, Eliza swayed. The room tilted, the floor rushing up to meet her. Caleb caught her before she fell, his grip firm, unhesitating. The town watched as he carried her through the snow, her head against his shoulder, the coat from the station wrapped around her once more. No one spoke. Even Mrs. Crow lowered her eyes. Eliza woke to dawn and the sound of wind easing its hold. Caleb sat nearby, hat in his hands, gaze fixed on the window as if measuring the light. When she stirred, he stood, uncertain for the first time she had known him. "They'll talk," she said quietly. He nodded. "They always do." She searched his face, looking for regret, for calculation. Found none. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. The word held more than agreement. It held choice. Spring did not come all at once. It arrived in small mercies, the softening of snow, the first green at the fence line, the way the town began to look at her differently. Respect grew slowly, the way trust always does, earned and fragile. On an evening washed gold by the lowering sun, Eliza stood beside Caleb on the rise above the ranch. Below them, the valley stretched wide and open, scarred by winter but alive. "Thank you," she said, not for the coat or the room or the ride, but for the quiet way he had seen her when the world would not. Caleb said nothing. He reached for her hand, tentative, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Years later, people would speak of that winter as a turning point. They would tell the story wrong in places, polishing it into something louder than it ever was. But the truth lived in smaller moments, in warmth offered without demand, in dignity reclaimed step by step, in love that arrived without announcement and stayed. And if you've listened this far, perhaps it's because some part of you knows that kind of winter too. The kind that tests whether kindness still matters. If this story left you warmer than you were before, stay a while longer. Subscribe to Wild West Tales, and let more forgotten hearts find their way home.